Asian immigrants, their children, perform on average as well as native-born Caucasians who have a 15 IQ point advantage, which is roughly the difference between a college student and a high school student. And so there's something in the Asian culture, and what it is quite clear, actually. It's an incredibly intense work ethic and respect for achievement, disciplined achievement in the economic realm. That's hammered in right from now. That disappears after about 2 generations.
Yes, but presumably also there's the maintenance of the family structure, so that I mean, you don't, certainly where I was anyway, you didn't get this this complete breakdown. I mean, I never met children of Indian immigrants who didn't know who their father was.
Right, right. Well, and that's an interesting phenomenon too. I went to a talk at one point at the university 5 or 6 years ago, and a feminist was speaking, or a former feminist, maybe a real feminist now. Her name was Janice Fiamengo, and she had been a radical leftist feminist and was in the English literature department, and eventually realized that what she was involved in was an academic scam fundamentally, and turned into quite a vocal critic of that particular perspective, postmodern, say neo-Marxist perspective. She mentioned to the audience that intact families with fathers, the children in those families do much better on virtually every measure you can possibly imagine. And in my naivety at that point, I thought, well, that's going to be an incontrovertible statement, because all you have to do is be remotely familiar with the childhood development literature and you figure that out right away. And yet it was as if she dropped a live snake into the audience, because, and this is that toxic sentimentality that you were talking about. Say, well, look, there are obviously struggling single parents who are struggling for no fault of their own, a perfectly credible job of raising high-performing children. And then if you say, well, the 2-parent family is more desirable, by implication, you're denigrating that accomplishment, let's say. But and fair enough, there is a real tension there, and there are exceptions to the rule, but it's still the case that if you were trying to design public policy that was of benefit to children, you would design public policy that would reward people for long-term monogamous relationships where one of the participants was male.
Yeah, well,
but you need to use judgment for that.
Yes, but if you look at I mean, if you look at literature, for example, there has been a consistent attack on that view for many, many years, going back, for example, the Fabians and so on. And what happens is that people use marginal cases as being central. So, and as I've already said, it's undoubtedly true that many marriages were oppressive, and that being in an unhappy marriage is a horrible experience, is a terrible experience. It's a long form of torture. But people then thought that there was a perfect solution to this problem. There's a perfect solution to human relationships. And there is no perfect solution. There's only better and worse. And whatever form of human relationships you're going to have, there are going to be terrible ones. But you, as far as I could see, and I had no real opinion about this until I actually immersed myself in the world in which I did immerse myself, it's quite clear to me that without a formal structure of relationships, things are absolutely terrible for very large numbers of people. Now, of course, it's perfectly true that I saw, if you like, only the failed cases, but there may have been.
The question then would be, well, where would you find the successful cases? because let's think this through, because it's a crucial point, you know. Okay, so you have a biased sample, and maybe you approach this from an ethically conservative perspective, and so that produces your viewpoint, and it bears little relationship to the real world. But let's look for the counterexamples. So, well, first of all, you can't look among the high-functioning middle to upper classes for counterexamples because they're all married.
Yeah.
Right? So then you think, well, is there a subset of people who are poor, who are flourishing in their serial relationships, in their fragmented serial relationships? And well, first of all, probably not, because they're poor, right? By definition, you've already excluded the middle and upper class. So I'm kind of curious about.
Well, I tried to think, I thought, well, how is someone living in these circumstances supposed to get out of this situation?
Right. What would look like a viable, practical alternative that would be better?
Yes, but that didn't involve changing the way they made their relationships or pursued their relationships. So we have to keep the relationship, the structure of the relationships the same. What else can they do that would make their lives better? And I just couldn't see how their lives could get better while you have this kind of free for all. Well, it wasn't really free for all; it was free for some. And so I came to the conclusion that it was a social and cultural disaster.
Well, so we could look at the fantasies of sexual libertinism, let's say. And I think a good place to look, and you know, I might be way off base here, but whatever, I'm going to forge forward. Let's look at Playboy, because Playboy was the first mass market magazine that sort of introduced the idea of sophisticated sexual freedom into the mass audience. Right, and that quickly degenerated into Penthouse and Hustler, and then to this bloody online catastrophe where everything goes, and it's a cesspit of unimaginable proportions. But in any case, back to Playboy. Well, you know, you have two sophisticated people. The woman's in her early 20s. The guy's maybe 5 years older than that. They both have a glass of nicely aged wine. They're sitting in a 50s living room that's sophisticated, discussing literature, and they're both free to make their choices, and so they have sex. And then maybe your life is an unending sequence of those perfect dates. It's like, well, what are the preconditions for that even to be possible? Well, you both have to be young.